The iron collar caught the afternoon light like a mockery of jewelry. It was December 24th, 1879, and the snow fell heavy over Fort Bridger, Wyoming territory, muffling the world into an eerie silence that made the woman's scream cut even sharper through the air. Nathan Cooper heard it from inside the trading post, where he was buying winter supplies. The sound stopped him mid-sentence, his hand frozen over the counter where he'd been counting out coins for lamp oil and coffee. The screams of women weren't uncommon on the frontier, but something in this one, something raw and desperate, pulled at a part of him he thought had died 4 years ago with Sarah. He left his purchases where they lay and pushed through the door into the street. The crowd had already formed the way crowds always do when there's blood in the water. 20 men stood in a loose circle, none of them meeting each other's eyes, all of them watching. At the center of that circle, kneeling in snow that was turning pink beneath her, was a young woman with a chain around her neck. Not a necklace, a collar. The kind you'd use on a dog you didn't trust not to run. The man holding the other end of that chain was Cornelius Wallace. Nate knew him by reputation, though they'd never spoken. Everyone in Wyoming territory knew Wallace. He owned half the land between here and Cheyenne, and he owned it the way a king owns a kingdom, with absolute certainty that everything within his borders belonged to him by divine right. The woman at his feet was maybe 22, though the bruises on her face made it hard to tell. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and when she looked up, Nate saw that one of her eyes was swollen nearly shut, but the other eye gray as winter smoke burned with something that wasn't quite broken yet. Wallace raised his hand. He was holding a riding crop, the expensive kind with silver inlay on the handle. The kind a man carried not because he needed it, but because he could afford it. The crop came down across the woman's cheek with a crack that echoed off the false fronts of the buildings lining the street. Her head snapped to the side, but she didn't cry out. She just looked back up at him with that one good eye still burning. "You think you can run from me?" Wallace's voice was cultured, educated, the kind of voice that came from Eastern schools and old money. It made the violence somehow worse. "You belong to me, girl. You signed the papers. 7 years of service, and you've only given me 7. We had a contract." "I'm not cattle," the woman said. Her voice came out hoarse, like she'd been screaming for a while before Nate arrived. "I'm not property." Wallace laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that came from real amusement. "Oh, but you are dear Anna. The law says so. I have the documents. $700 I paid to settle your parents' debts when they died. $700 makes you mine until that debt is worked off. And since you ran," he raised the crop again, "well, I'll have to add the cost of retrieving you to what you owe." The crop started to fall. The gunshot stopped it halfway down. The bullet hit the snow 6 inches in front of Wallace's polished boots, exactly where Nate had aimed it. Not close enough to be an accident, close enough to be a promise. Every head in the crowd turned toward him. Nate stood 30 feet away, his rifle still raised to his shoulder, the barrel steady as a surveyor's line. He'd been a sniper in the war, the kind they sent out alone into Confederate territory to take out officers from half a mile away. 30 feet was nothing. At this range he could put a bullet through the eye of a needle if he wanted to. "Lower the crop," Nate said. His voice came out flat empty of everything except the simple statement of fact. "Do it now." Wallace turned slowly, taking his time about it, making sure everyone watching understood that he wasn't afraid. "And who might you be? Someone telling you to lower the crop. This doesn't concern you, friend. This is a legal matter between me and my property." Nate worked the lever on his rifle, chambering another round. The metallic click was very loud in the sudden silence. "People aren't property. Not anymore. Lower it, or the next one goes through your hand." For a long moment Wallace just stared at him. Then something shifted in his face, some calculation running behind his eyes. He lowered the crop, not because he was afraid, but because a man like Wallace was always thinking 3 moves ahead, always weighing costs against benefits. "Very heroic," Wallace said. "But it doesn't change the facts. This woman owes me money. $700 plus interest. That's the law." Nate walked forward through the snow, his rifle never wavering. When he got close enough to see the woman clearly, something twisted in his chest. The collar around her neck wasn't just iron, it was locked. A real lock, the kind that needed a key. And from the raw, reddened skin beneath it, she'd been wearing it for a long time. For just a second, so fast he almost missed it, her eyes met his. There was no hope in them, just a question, naked and desperate. Are you another monster? Or are you something else? He thought of Sarah who had died in their bed with her hand in his, bleeding from someplace deep inside that the frontier doctor couldn't reach. Sarah who had made him promise with her last breath that he wouldn't let grief kill him too. That he'd live. That he'd be the man she'd married, the man who helped people because it was right, not because it was profitable. He'd broken that promise for 4 years. Maybe this was his chance to keep it. How much? He asked. Wallace blinked. Excuse me. I said how much? To buy out her contract. How much? A slow smile spread across Wallace's face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a cat that's just realized the mouse has run into a corner instead of toward the hole. Oh, she's not for sale. The contract is for labor, not ownership. I can't sell what I don't own. Then how much to pay off her debt? $700. Wallace paused. Plus 7 years of interest at 10% per annum, and the cost of retrieving her when she ran, let's call it an even $2,500. The crowd gasped. $2,500 was more money than most men in Wyoming Territory saw in 5 years. It was 3 good horses. It was a quarter section of land. It was everything. It was also every penny Nate had saved in 4 years of living alone, eating beans and selling wool to the army. Deal, Nate said. Wallace's smile faltered. Just for a second, surprise flickered across his face. Then he recovered the smile, coming back harder than before. You're serious. Do I look like I'm joking? You understand that once you pay, she's free to go. She doesn't owe you anything. You're buying nothing but paper. I understand. Wallace studied him for a long moment, then he shrugged. Your funeral. But I'll need the money now. Cash only. Marshal's office, Nate said. I'll need papers signed. 20 minutes later, they stood in Marshal Hayes's cramped office. Hayes himself watching with tired eyes as Nate counted out his entire savings onto the desk. Bills and coins, all of it. Everything he'd worked for since Sarah died. Gone. Wallace signed the papers with a flourish, his handwriting elegant and mocking. Then he pushed them across the desk toward Nate. Congratulations. You just bought yourself the most expensive mistake of your life. She's damaged goods, Cooper. Broken. You'll regret this before the week is out. Nate said nothing. He just took the papers, folded them carefully, and put them in his coat pocket. Wallace stood adjusting his expensive coat. At the door he paused and looked back. I'll be seeing you again, Cooper. Count on it. Then he was gone, taking his money and his smile with him. Outside, Anna still knelt in the snow where they'd left her. No one had helped her up. No one had even come close. That was the thing about frontier towns. People minded their own business, especially when the business involved Cornelius Wallace. Nate knelt down in front of her. She flinched back, and he stopped moving immediately. I have the key, he said quietly. Wallace left it. Can I unlock that? She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. The lock was stiff from rust and old blood. It took him 3 tries to get it open. When the collar finally came free and fell into the snow, Anna made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a gasp. Her hand went to her neck, touching the raw skin there, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Nate picked up the collar. It was heavier than he'd expected, and the inside was stained dark with old blood and older rust. He looked at it for a long moment, this thing that had been locked around a human being's neck, and something cold and hard settled in his chest. Why? Anna's voice came out as barely a whisper. Why did you do that? Because no one deserves to wear this, Nate said. He stood up, offering her his hand. She looked at it like it might turn into a snake. You don't owe me anything. But I have a ranch about 6 miles from here. You can rest there, get warm, decide where you want to go." "Where I want to go?" She said it like the words were in a foreign language. "Yes, your choice, always your choice." She stared at his hand for another long moment. Then, moving like every muscle hurt, she reached out and took it. Her hand was so cold it almost burned. The ride back to Cooper Ranch took 2 hours through deepening snow. Anna rode behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling. Every time he shifted in the saddle, she tensed. Every time he spoke, she flinched. Nate had been a soldier. He'd seen what war did to people, how violence carved itself into the body and stayed there long after the wounds healed. Anna had been at war for 7 years. It showed in every line of her body, every hitched breath, every moment of frozen terror when his hand moved too quickly. "Sarah," she said suddenly, about 20 minutes into the ride. Nate's shoulders went rigid. "What? You said her name when you were counting the money. You whispered, 'Sarah, forgive me.'" He had done that. He hadn't meant to, but muscle memory was a strange thing. Every time he'd counted money over the last 4 years, he'd thought of Sarah. Every penny saved was a penny he hadn't been able to spend to save her. "My wife," he said. "She died 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Not your fault." They rode in silence for another few minutes. Then Anna spoke again, her voice muffled against his back. "Did I remind you of her as... Is that why you helped me?" It was a fair question, an honest one. It deserved an honest answer. "No," Nate said. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, that's all." He felt her nod against his back. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, "Thank you." The ranch appeared as the sun was setting, painting the snow pink and gold. It wasn't much, just a log house and a barn and a sheep pen that held about 300 head, but it was solid built, to last built by hands that knew how to work wood and stone. A teenage boy came out of the barn as they approached. Elijah Cooper wasn't Nate's son by blood, but they didn't talk about that. Eli's mother had been Shoshone, his father a trapper who died in an avalanche. When Eli showed up at the ranch 3 years ago, half-starved and completely alone, Nate had taken him in the same way you'd taken anything that needed help. No questions, no conditions. "Nate," Eli called. Then he saw Anna, and his voice changed. "Oh." "Eli, this is Anna," Nate said as he dismounted. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Eli looked at the collar still hanging from Nate's saddle, then at Anna's neck, then at Nate. Understanding flickered across his face. He was 16, but the frontier made people grow up fast. He'd seen enough to recognize cruelty when he saw its aftermath. "The loft room?" he asked. "No," Nate said. "She gets the spare room, the one with the lock on the inside." That had been Sarah's sewing room back when Sarah had been alive to sew. Nate hadn't been in there since the funeral, but it had a door that locked from the inside, and right now, that seemed more important than ghosts. Inside the house, Nate showed Anna to the room. It was small but clean, with a bed and a window that looked out over the mountains. Most importantly, it had a heavy bolt on the inside of the door. "The lock only works from in here," Nate said, standing carefully in the doorway, not coming in. "I can't open it unless you let me. I'll knock before meals. If you don't want to eat, that's fine. If you don't want to come out at all, that's fine too. And if you want to leave, I'll give you a horse and enough money to get to Oregon." Anna stood in the middle of the room, hugging herself, looking like she might shatter if someone breathed on her too hard. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something. I want you to be safe. That's all." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie. When she couldn't find it, something in her broke. She sank down onto the edge of the bed and started to cry great, wrenching sobs that sounded like they were being torn out of her chest. Nate stood there helpless, wanting to comfort her, and knowing that any touch right now would be cruelty, so he just stepped back out of the room and pulled the door closed behind him. A moment later, he heard the bolt slide home. the lock clicking into place. It was the first time in 7 years that Anna Brennan had been able to lock a door from the inside. Downstairs, Eli was making coffee. He looked up as Nate came down, questions written all over his face. "Don't ask," Nate said. "I wasn't going to." But after a minute of silence, Eli spoke anyway. "You gave her all your money, didn't you? I saw you counting it this morning before you left." "Yes." "That was everything. Everything we saved." "I know. We can't expand the flock now, can't buy the Johnson land, can't do any of the things we planned." "I know," Nate said again. Eli poured coffee into 2 tin cups. He pushed one across the table to Nate, then sat down across from him. "Sarah would be proud of you." Nate wrapped his hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into his frozen fingers. He thought about Sarah, about the last thing she'd said to him. "Promise me you'll live. Promise me you'll love again. Promise me you won't let grief turn you into stone." "I hope so," he said. Upstairs the crying had stopped. The house was silent except for the wind outside and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Somewhere in that silence, a woman who had been property for 7 years was learning what it felt like to be alone by choice instead of by force. And somewhere in Fort Bridger, Cornelius Wallace was planning how to get his property back. But for now, in this moment in this small house in the Wyoming mountains, 3 people who weren't family by blood, but were family by choice sat in the warmth and the quiet. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Because tomorrow everything was going to get much, much worse. The scream came at 2 in the morning. Nate was already awake when he heard it. He'd been lying on the floor of the main room staring at the ceiling beams and thinking about the $2,500 he'd never see again, not regretting it exactly, but feeling the weight of it. That money had been his future, his security, his plan for everything that came after loneliness. Now it was gone, and in its place was a woman he didn't know locked in a room upstairs, and the certain knowledge that Cornelius Wallace wasn't the kind of man who let things go. The scream cut through those thoughts like a knife through cloth. He was on his feet and up the stairs before his mind fully registered what he was doing. Eli came out of his room at the same time, both of them converging on the door to Anna's room. The door was still locked. From inside came the sound of sobbing, ragged and raw. Nate knocked. "Anna, are you hurt?" No answer. Just more crying, the kind that sounded like it might never stop. "Anna, I need to know if you're injured. Should I get Doc Morrison?" "No." Her voice came muffled through the door. "No doctors. They'll know. They'll tell." "Tell what?" "Just go away, please." Eli looked at Nate. Nate looked back. Then he heard something that made his blood go cold. A wet sound, something dripping onto the floor. "Anna, I'm coming in. Stand back from the door." He put his shoulder into it. The bolt was strong, but the door frame was old wood, and Nate had spent 4 years working a ranch alone. The frame splintered on the second hit, and the door swung open. Anna was huddled in the corner furthest from the door, her arms wrapped around herself. Blood ran down her wrist from a shallow cut pooling on the floor beneath her. In her other hand was a small knife, the kind women used for sewing. The kind that wouldn't kill you quickly, but would do the job eventually if you were determined enough. Nate stopped dead in the doorway. Behind him, he heard Eli's sharp intake of breath. "Don't come closer," Anna said. Her voice was steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "Don't look at me. I can't." "Can't what?" Nate stayed where he was, hands visible, making himself as non-threatening as a 6-foot man covered in someone else's blood could be. "I can't give you what you paid for." The words came out in a rush. "Wallace, for 7 years, and now I'm—" She pressed her free hand to her stomach. "I'm carrying his child. 3 months. That's why I ran. I couldn't bring a baby into that place. But now you've spent all your money on me, and I'm ruined, and the baby is his, and I can't even give you a clean slate for your trouble." The silence that followed was so complete that Nate could hear the snow falling outside. "So I thought," Anna continued, her voice breaking, "I thought it would be better if you didn't have to deal with this. With me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She raised the knife again. Nate moved without thinking. He crossed the room in 3 strides, caught her wrist and twisted the knife free. It clattered to the floor and he kicked it away. Then he did something he'd told himself he wouldn't do. He grabbed her shoulders and forced her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice came out harder than he'd meant it to. "You are not ruined. Do you hear me? You are hurt. There's a difference. The baby is a baby. Babies don't carry their father's sins, and you didn't ask for any of this. But you paid all that money for a woman who's pregnant with another man's child. A man who—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Nate's hands were shaking. He realized he was gripping her too hard and forced himself to loosen his hold. "I didn't pay that money expecting anything. I paid it because a human being was wearing a collar, and that was wrong. That's the only reason. Not because I wanted a wife or a worker or anything else, just because it was wrong. But now you're stuck with me. I'm not stuck with anyone. You can leave any time you want. But if you stay because you choose to not, because you owe me. And if there's a child coming, then there's a child coming. That doesn't change anything." Anna stared at him. Her gray eyes were wide and shocked, like she'd just been told the sky was green and was trying to decide if she believed it. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." "Because 4 years ago, my wife was dying, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it. I held her hand, and I promised her I'd be fine, and we both knew I was lying. She made me promise something too. She made me promise I wouldn't let grief kill me, that I'd keep living, keep helping people, keep being the man she married." He let go of Anna's shoulders and sat back on his heels. "I broke that promise for 4 years. I lived, but I wasn't alive. I just existed, went through the motions. And then yesterday I saw you in that collar, and I thought, here's something I can do. Here's one person I can help. Maybe that doesn't fix anything. Maybe it doesn't bring Sarah back. But it's something. I'm not a charity case. I know you're not. And I don't need saving. I know that too." She looked down at the blood on her wrist. "Then what am I? Someone who's had a hell of a time and deserves a chance to figure out what comes next. That's all." Eli cleared his throat from the doorway. "I'm going to get Doc Morrison." "No." Anna's head snapped up. "I said no doctors. You're bleeding." Eli pointed out, his voice gentle. "And if you're pregnant, you need someone to make sure you're okay. Doc Morrison isn't like the doctors in town. She won't tell anyone anything." Sarah Morrison," Nate said. "She was Sarah Cooper's best friend, named after her, actually. She's been delivering babies and setting bones in Wyoming territory for 30 years, and she doesn't gossip. Not ever." Anna looked between them, calculating odds, weighing trust. Finally she nodded. Eli disappeared down the stairs. They heard the front door slam, then the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Nate stood up slowly. "I'm going to get some cloth to wrap that wrist. Don't move." When he came back with clean bandages and water from the pump, Anna was still sitting in the corner, but she'd stopped crying. Her face was pale and set, like she'd made some kind of decision. "If I stay," she said as he knelt down to clean the cut, "I pay my way. I'm not dead weight." "You're pregnant and you just tried to kill yourself. Maybe rest for a day or two first." "I'm serious." "So am I." He wrapped the bandage around her wrist with careful, practiced movements. Sarah had taught him this during the war, how to bind wounds so they'd heal clean. "But if working makes you feel better, I'm not going to stop you. Just no more of this." He gestured to the knife on the floor. "Deal." She looked at his hands on hers, at the gentleness of the touch. "You really don't want anything from me." "I really don't." "That's—" She stopped searching for words. "That's the strangest thing anyone's ever done for me." Doc Morrison arrived an hour later, a compact woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Anna, then at Nate, then sent both men out of the room with a voice that brooked no argument. Nate and Eli waited downstairs. The sun was coming up, painting the snow outside with pink and gold light. Christmas morning, Nate realized. He'd forgotten it was Christmas. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Doc Morrison came down. She poured herself coffee without asking, sat at the table, and fixed Nate with a look that could have stripped paint. "She's about 3 months pregnant, malnourished, and covered in scars I won't describe in polite company. The wrist will heal fine if she keeps it clean. The rest of it," she shook her head, "the body heals faster than the mind, Nate. You understand that?" "I do. She may never trust a man again, including you." "I know. So why'd you do it? Don't give me that line about it being the right thing. I want the real reason." Nate wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. Outside, the sun was fully up now, turning the world white and gold. "When Sarah died, I couldn't save her. I had all the money in the world and it didn't matter. The doctor couldn't reach whatever was bleeding inside her, and she died anyway. I've been carrying that for 4 years. The uselessness of it. The fact that nothing I could do mattered." He looked up at Doc Morrison. "Anna, I could save. Maybe that doesn't fix anything. Maybe it's just me trying to make up for something that can't be made up for. But at least it's something I could do." Doc Morrison studied him for a long moment. Then her face softened. "Sarah would be proud of you, you know. She always said you had the biggest heart of any man she'd ever met. She'd be glad you're using it again." After Doc Morrison left, the day settled into an odd kind of quiet. Anna stayed in her room. Nate and Eli did the morning chores in silence, feeding the sheep and breaking ice on the water troughs. The work was familiar, soothing in its routine. It was almost noon when Anna finally came downstairs. She'd washed her face and changed into a dress she must have found in the wardrobe, one of Sarah's old ones. It fit her poorly, too loose in some places and too tight in others, but it was clean. "I can cook," she said without preamble, "if you show me where things are." Nate gestured to the pantry. "Help yourself." She moved around the kitchen like she was navigating a minefield, touching things carefully, looking for permission before she took anything. But her hands were steady, and when she started chopping vegetables for soup, the movements were practiced. Someone had taught her to cook, and taught her well. They ate in silence, the three of them, around the small table. The soup was good, better than anything Nate had managed in 4 years of bachelor cooking. Anna ate like someone who'd forgotten what full felt like, finishing one bowl and then reaching for another before she caught herself. "There's plenty," Nate said quietly. "Eat what you want." After the meal, after the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean again, Anna stood by the window, looking out at the snow. Nate was mending a harness by the fire. Eli had gone to check on the sheep. "I need to tell you something," Anna said without turning around, "about Wallace, about why he'll come back." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him. "Because when he comes, and he will come, you need to understand what you're dealing with." Nate set down the harness and gave her his full attention. "Wallace doesn't see people," Anna said. "He sees things, property, assets. And when something that belongs to him gets away, he doesn't just let it go. It's not about me specifically. It's about the principle, about making sure everyone knows that what's his stays his. The law is what Wallace says it is. He owns the judge in Cheyenne. He owns half the marshals in the territory, and he owns enough men with guns to make the rest irrelevant." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When I ran the first time, he sent 5 men after me. They brought me back in chains. He locked the collar on me himself in front of everyone in his household, to make a point. How many times did you run? 4. The last time was 2 weeks ago. I made it as far as Fort Bridger before his men caught up with me. He was bringing me back when you stopped him." Nate thought about Wallace's face in the marshal's office, the smile, the certainty. "He'll come for you, not for me, for what I represent, for the idea that someone can take what's his and get away with it. Then we make sure you're protected." Anna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How you're one man, he has an army. I have friends. Do you have friends willing to stand between them and Cornelius Wallace, Because I've seen what he does to people who get in his way. The question hung in the air like smoke. Nate thought about the other ranchers in the valley. Good men, most of them, hard workers. But Wallace had money and power and the law on his side. Would they risk all that for a woman they didn't know? He didn't have an answer. The answer came 3 days later in the form of Marshal Hayes riding up to the ranch with papers in his hand and murder in his eyes. Nate was in the barn when he heard the horse. He came out to find Hayes dismounting his badge, catching the winter sun. Behind him, close enough to be threatening but far enough to claim innocence, were 3 men on horses. Wallace's men. Nate recognized 2 of them from Fort Bridger. "Marshal," Nate said evenly. "Cooper." Hayes held up the papers. "I've got a summons here from Judge Williams in Cheyenne. Cornelius Wallace is charging you with kidnapping and assault." "That's interesting considering I have legal papers showing I paid off Anna's debt." "Wallace claims you threatened him with a gun, forced the sale under duress. And he's saying the woman isn't here voluntarily, that you're keeping her against her will. That's a lie." "Then let me talk to her." Anna appeared in the doorway of the house. She'd heard the horses, too. She stood very still, her hand on the doorframe, her face pale. Hayes tipped his hat to her. "Miss Brennan, or is it Mrs. Cooper now?" Wallace seems confused on that point. "It's Brennan," Anna said, her voice steady. "Are you being held here against your will, Miss Brennan?" "No." "Did Cooper threaten you or harm you in any way?" "No, he saved my life." Hayes looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "Then you'll need to come to Cheyenne. January 14th. There's a hearing. Wallace wants his money back, or he wants you back, or both. Judge will decide." "I'm pregnant," Anna said flatly, "with Wallace's child. He raped me for 7 years, and now I'm carrying the proof of it. Is the judge going to care about that?" Hayes's jaw tightened. "I don't know, miss. I honestly don't know. But if you don't show up, he'll issue a warrant for Cooper's arrest, and I'll have to serve it." After Hayes and his escort left, Anna stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking at the snow. Finally, she spoke without turning around. "You should let me go. Save yourself the trouble." "No. He's going to destroy you, your ranch, your reputation, everything." "I know." "Then why won't you just let me go?" Nate walked up behind her, careful to stay far enough back that she wouldn't feel threatened. "Because the moment I do, you become property again. And I didn't spend $2,500 in 4 years of savings just to hand you back to a monster." She turned to look at him then, and there were tears on her face. "What am I supposed to do? We go to Cheyenne. We tell the truth. We trust that somewhere in all of Wallace's corruption, there's still a scrap of justice left. And if there's not," Nate thought about that for a long moment. Then he said the thing he'd been thinking since Hayes rode away. "Then we make our own justice." That night, after Eli had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Anna came downstairs to find Nate sitting at the table cleaning his rifle. He looked up as she entered, then went back to his work. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No." She sat down across from him. "Nate, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Why haven't you asked me to marry you?" The question caught him off guard. His hands stilled on the rifle. "What? It's the obvious solution, isn't it? If I'm your wife, Wallace can't claim ownership. The debt becomes yours. The baby becomes legitimate. It solves everything." "It doesn't solve anything if you don't want it." "But it would protect you. Protect the ranch." Nate set down the cleaning cloth and looked at her directly. "Anna, I'm not going to ask you to marry me because it's convenient. Marriage means something. It should mean something. And after everything Wallace did to you, after 7 years of having no choice about anything, I'm not going to take that choice away from you, too. But if it could help." "No." His voice was firm. "When I married Sarah, I promised her forever. I promised her everything. And even though she's gone, that still means something to me. If I ever ask someone to marry me again, it's going to be because I love them, not because it's strategically useful." Anna was quiet for a long moment. "You really loved her, more than anything. Do you think you could ever love someone else? The question hung between them like a dare. Nate thought about it carefully before answering. I don't know. Maybe, someday, but not because I'm trying to replace her. That's not how it works. How does it work? I think. I think there's room in a person for more than one kind of love. Sarah will always be Sarah. What we had will always be what we had. But that doesn't mean there's no space for something new, something different. He paused. But it has to be real. It has to matter. It can't be just a legal arrangement. Anna nodded slowly. You're a strange man, Nathan Cooper. I've been told that before. She stood up, preparing to go back upstairs. At the bottom of the stairs she stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, I think Sarah chose well. You're exactly the kind of man worth loving. Then she was gone, leaving Nate alone with his rifle and his thoughts and the ghost of a wife who'd made him promise to keep living. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in white. And somewhere in Cheyenne, Cornelius Wallace was planning his next move in a game that only had two possible endings. Either Anna Brennan would be free or Nathan Cooper would be destroyed trying to make her so. There was no middle ground, not anymore. The days before the hearing passed like water through a sieve. Fast and impossible to hold on to. Nate threw himself into work splitting enough firewood to last 3 winters mending fences that didn't need mending, doing anything that would keep his hands busy and his mind from calculating the odds of what was coming. The odds weren't good. Wallace had money, influence, and the law on his side. Nate had the truth, and in his experience, truth was a weak weapon against power. Anna grew stronger, not in body, though Doc Morrison said the baby was doing well and Anna was finally putting on some of the weight she desperately needed. But there was something else changing in her, something harder to name. She moved through the house with more certainty now. She didn't flinch every time Nate or Eli came into a room. She spoke without that constant calculation in her eyes, the one that said she was always measuring how much honesty would cost her. On the 5th day after Marshall Hayes's visit, she asked Nate to teach her to shoot. They stood in the snow behind the barn, the winter sun pale and cold overhead. Nate had brought his Colt .45, the revolver he'd carried through the war and never fired since, except to put down wounded animals. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull. Her hands shook the first time she tried to fire. The gun kicked harder than she'd expected, and the bullet went wide, missing the target by 3 feet. She lowered the gun frustrated, and Nate saw the beginning of tears in her eyes. I can't even do this right, she said. First time I fired a gun, I missed a barn door from 5 feet away, Nate said. And that's not a figure of speech. Actual barn door. 5 feet. She almost smiled. You're lying to make me feel better. I'm telling you the truth to make you feel better. There's a difference. He moved closer, and this time she didn't tense when he reached out to adjust her grip. You're gripping too tight. The gun's not going to run away. Let it sit in your hand like you're holding something precious but fragile. She tried again. This time the bullet hit the snow 2 feet in front of the target. Better, Nate said. I missed. But you're learning. Try again. The 3rd shot went wide. The 4th hit the ground. The 5th, 6th, and 7th disappeared into the snowbank beyond the target. And then the 8th shot fired just as the sun was starting to set and the cold was seeping through their coats, hit the center of the target with a sound like vindication. Anna lowered the gun slowly. For a moment she just stood there staring at the hole she'd punched in the wood. Then she looked at Nate, and her face held an expression he'd never seen before. Not quite a smile. Something fiercer. Something that looked like hope sharpened to a point. I did it, she said. You did. Can I try again? They stood there until the light failed, and Eli called them in for supper. And by the time they walked back to the house, Anna had hit the target 7 more times. Her hands were steady now, her breathing even. She looked like someone who had just discovered she wasn't helpless after all. That night at dinner, she was different. She sat straighter, spoke more. When Eli told a story about one of the sheep getting its head stuck in the fence, she laughed. Actually laughed, a sound so unexpected that both Nate and Eli stopped eating just to stare at her. "What?" she asked, still smiling. "Nothing," Nate said. "Just nice to hear you laugh." The smile faded a little, but it didn't disappear entirely. I'd almost forgotten how. After Eli went to bed, Nate sat in his usual chair by the fire working on the accounts, or trying to. Mostly he was staring at numbers that didn't add up and thinking about courtrooms and judges and the way Wallace had smiled when he said he'd be seeing them again. Anna came and sat in the chair across from him. She'd taken to doing that lately, sitting with him in the evenings while he worked. They didn't always talk. Sometimes she just sat there reading one of Sarah's books or mending clothes. But the companionship was there, quiet and solid. "I've been thinking," she said. Nate looked up from the ledger. "About what you said, about marriage, about how it should mean something." She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture that made her look younger than her 22 years. What if it could mean something and also be useful? "Anna, hear me out. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me. I know that's not how this works. But what if we got married because we're partners, because we're in this together? Not romance, but respect, trust, the things that actually matter when you're building a life with someone." Nate set down his pen. "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Not because I'm afraid of Wallace, though I am. Not because I need protection, though I do. But because—" She stopped, searching for words. "Because for the first time in 7 years, I look at tomorrow and I don't dread it. I wake up and I'm not afraid. I go to sleep and I know no one is going to hurt me. That's because of you, because of this place, and I want to keep it. You can keep it without marrying me. Can I? If Wallace wins, if the judge gives him back his money and his property, where do I go? What do I do? I can't go back to him. I'd rather die. But if I'm your wife legally before that hearing, then I'm not his to take. I'm choosing you, choosing this, choosing my own life." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like breathing. "I need you to understand something," Nate said slowly. "If we do this, it's real, not just on paper. I take marriage seriously. If you're my wife, I protect you. I provide for you. I stand with you, for better or worse. And I'd expect the same from you." "I know. And someday maybe there might be more than just partnership." "I'm not saying it would happen. I'm not promising anything. But if we're married, if we're building a life together, feelings might grow. Real feelings. Would you be all right with that?" Anna looked at him for a long moment, her gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "I think," she said carefully, "that might be the best thing I could hope for. To start with respect and trust and see where it leads. To not have it forced or bought or taken, but to let it grow naturally, if it grows at all. And if it doesn't, then we have respect and trust. And that's more than most marriages I've seen." Nate thought about Sarah. About the way they'd met at a barn dance when they were both 19, how she'd laughed when he stepped on her foot, how he'd fallen in love with her, somewhere between that laugh and the moment she'd said yes when he asked her to dance again. It had been easy with Sarah, natural, like breathing. This would be different, harder, more deliberate. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe there was value in choosing to build something rather than just falling into it. "All right," he said. Anna blinked. "All right. If you're sure this is what you want, then yes. We'll get married, before the hearing. Make it legal and binding so Wallace can't touch you." Something flickered across her face, too quick to name. Relief, maybe, or fear, or both at once. "When? Tomorrow. There's a preacher in Fort Bridger, Reverend Shaw. He's a good man. He'll do it quietly if we ask." "Tomorrow," Anna repeated like she was testing the word. Then she stood up, crossed the small space between them, and did something that surprised them both. She leaned down and kissed Nate on the forehead. Just a brief press of lips against skin there and gone in a heartbeat. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me a choice." Then she went upstairs, leaving Nate sitting by the fire with his hand pressed to his forehead where he could still feel the warmth of her lips. The wedding took place at noon the next day in the small church at Fort Bridger. There were no decorations, no music, no guests except for Eli and Doc Morrison, who Nate had sent for because weddings needed witnesses, and Doc was the closest thing to family either of them had left. Reverend Shaw was a tall, spare man with kind eyes and hands that had baptized half the babies in Wyoming territory. He looked at Nate and Anna standing before him in their everyday clothes, no fancy dress or pressed suit, and asked the question that mattered. "Are you both here of your own free will?" "Yes," Nate said. Anna hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then, "Yes." "And you understand what marriage means, that it's not a contract to be broken when convenient, but a covenant before God." "We do," they said together. The ceremony was simple. No long sermon, no elaborate vows, just the essential words that had been joining people together for centuries. Shaw asked if Nate would take Anna as his wife to love and honor and protect. Asked if Anna would take Nate as her husband to love and honor and stand beside. They both said yes. And then Shaw said the words that changed everything. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, looking at Nate with a small smile. "You may kiss your bride." Nate looked at Anna. She looked back. There was a question in his eyes asking permission. She gave the smallest nod. He kissed her forehead, the same place she'd kissed him the night before. Gentle, respectful, a promise more than a passion. Doc Morrison wiped her eyes. Eli grinned. And Reverend Shaw closed his Bible with a soft thump that sounded like an ending and a beginning at the same time. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper," he said. Outside the church, the winter sun was bright on the snow. Nate helped Anna into the wagon, and as he did, Eli came up beside them. "So," Eli said, trying not to smile too widely, "does this mean I should call Anna Mother now?" Anna froze. She looked at Eli, then at Nate, then back at Eli. You don't have to. I mean, if you want to, but I wouldn't presume." "I'd like to," Eli said simply, "if that's all right with you." For the second time in as many days, Nate watched Anna cry. But this time, they weren't tears of pain or fear. This time, when she pulled Eli into a hug, she was crying the way people cry at weddings. Like something precious and fragile had just been given to them, and they couldn't quite believe it was real. "Yes," she said into Eli's shoulder. "Yes, you can call me Mother, if you want to." "Then it's settled," Eli said, pulling back with wet eyes of his own. "We're a family now." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, but the kind that comes when people are too full of feelings to trust their voices. Anna sat close to Nate on the wagon seat, closer than strictly necessary. Not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her through their coats. Halfway home, she spoke. "Thank you for not making it a spectacle, for keeping it simple. Didn't seem right to make a show of it. Wallace would have, if he'd ever actually married me instead of just—" She stopped. "He would have wanted everyone to see, to know that I was his." "You're not his. You never were. I know that now." They were almost back to the ranch when Nate saw the smoke. Not the normal smoke from the chimney, too much smoke, too dark, coming from the wrong direction. He snapped the reins, urging the horses faster. Anna grabbed the seat to steady herself, her face going pale as she saw what he'd seen. The barn was on fire. No, not on fire. Had been on fire. The flames were out now, but smoke still poured from the charred timbers. The whole south wall had collapsed inward, and Nate could see through to where his tools had been, where the hay had been stored, where everything he'd built over 4 years had been. 3 men on horses sat 100 yards away, watching. One of them tipped his hat in mock salute when he saw Nate coming. Then they turned and rode away at a leisurely pace like they had all the time in the world. Nate pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down. The sheep were panicking, running in circles in their pen. 2 of them were down, not moving. The rest were bleating in terror, pressing against the far fence, trying to get away from the smoke. "Stay in the wagon," Nate told Anna. Then he ran for the water pump. It took an hour to make sure the fire was completely out and wouldn't spread to the house. By the time they were done, Nate, Eli, and Anna were covered in soot and ash. The barn was a total loss. So were most of his tools, all the stored hay, and 4 sheep that had died in the panic. Anna stood looking at the destruction with her hand pressed to her mouth. "This is my fault." "This is Wallace's fault," Nate said. "He did it because of me, because you married me. This is a message." "Then the message is received, but it doesn't change anything, doesn't it? He burned your barn, Nate. What's next? The house, the sheep. You—" Her voice was rising, panic creeping in. "I should leave. I should go before he destroys everything you have." Nate grabbed her shoulders, turned her to face him. "You're my wife now. That means we face this together. You don't get to run to protect me, and I don't get to send you away to save the ranch. We stand together or we don't stand at all. But no buts. We go to that hearing. We tell the truth. And we trust that somewhere in this territory there is still enough justice left to matter." The hearing was set for January 14th, 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for a fight they couldn't win with weapons Nate didn't have. 3 days to trust that the truth would be enough. It wasn't much time, but it was all they had. That night, Anna didn't go to her room. She stayed downstairs with Nate, both of them sitting by the fire, not speaking, just being present with each other. Around midnight, she finally broke the silence. "I'm afraid," she said. "So am I." "What do we do if we lose?" Nate thought about that. About Wallace and his money and his power. About judges who could be bought and laws that bent for the rich. About the barn still smoking outside and the message it carried. "We don't lose," he said. "How can you be sure? Because losing means you go back to him. And I won't let that happen. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, you're not going back." Anna looked at him in the firelight. "You'd fight for me, even if it cost you everything." "Yes." "Why?" It was the same question she'd asked in the beginning. Why would you help me? Why would you spend your money? Why would you risk your life? But now the answer was different. Now, after days of meals shared and silences kept, and a wedding that might not have started with love, but started with something just as real, the answer came easier. "Because you're my wife," Nate said simply, "and that means something to me." Anna reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cold in his, and he could feel the calluses that 7 years of hard labor had left behind. But he could also feel her pulse steady and strong, the beat of a heart that refused to give up. "It means something to me, too," she said. They sat there until the fire burned down to embers, hands joined, facing the darkness together. And outside, the winter wind carried the smell of smoke and the promise of battle. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days until everything changed, for better or for worse. The attack came on the night of January 13th, 12 hours before they were supposed to leave for Cheyenne. Nate woke to the sound of breaking glass. Not the crash of an accident, but the deliberate smash of someone who wanted you to know they were coming. He was on his feet before his mind fully registered what was happening, reaching for the rifle he kept beside his bedroll on the floor. He'd been sleeping downstairs since the wedding, giving Anna the bedroom, giving her space, giving her the choice to come to him when and if she was ready, rather than assuming marriage gave him rights to anything. Now he was grateful for that choice because it meant he was between the intruders and his wife. The front door exploded inward. 5 men poured through, moving with the coordination of people who'd done this before, Professionals. Wallace's men, and they weren't here to talk. The first one through went down when Eli's shotgun roared from the top of the stairs. The boy had good instincts, shooting first and asking questions later. The gunman fell backward into the snow, clutching his leg, but 4 more were already inside. Nate fired once, twice, the rifle shots deafening in the enclosed space. One man spun away with a cry. Another dove behind the overturned table. The other 2 split up, one heading for the stairs where Eli was reloading, the other coming straight at Nate. They met in the middle of the room like colliding bulls. The man was bigger than Nate, heavier, and he had the momentum. They went down together, crashing through Sarah's old rocking chair. Nate felt something crack, wasn't sure if it was the chair or his ribs. The man's hands went for Nate's throat. Nate brought his knee up hard, connected with something soft, and the grip loosened. He rolled away, scrambling for the rifle he'd dropped. Never reached it. The man tackled him from behind, and they went down again, this time sliding across the floor toward the fireplace. Heat from the dying embers washed over Nate's face. He grabbed a poker from the hearth and swung it blindly backward, connected with something that made a wet, breaking sound. The man's weight disappeared. Nate rolled to his feet, poker still in hand, and saw chaos. Eli was wrestling with a gunman on the stairs. The boy was holding his own, but barely. The man had 50 pounds on him and was using every bit of it. The man Nate had shot was crawling toward the door, leaving a trail of blood on the floor. And the 4th man, the one who'd gone down behind the table, was standing now with his gun pointed at the top of the stairs, at Anna's bedroom door. "Anna!" Nate's shout came out raw. "Stay inside!" The gunman smiled. Too late for that. Anna's door opened. She stepped out onto the landing, and in her hands was the Colt .45 Nate had taught her to shoot. She raised it with both hands, the way he'd shown her, breathed out the way he'd taught her, and fired. The bullet took the gunman in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his gun, clutching at the wound, eyes wide with shock. Not because he'd been shot, Nate realized, but because a woman had shot him. That moment of shock was all Eli needed. He twisted, broke free from the man on the stairs, and shoved hard. The gunman tumbled backward, hit the floor, and didn't get up. Suddenly, it was quiet. 5 men had come through that door. 1 was bleeding out in the snow. 2 were unconscious. 1 was crawling away, and 1 was staring at Anna like she'd just sprouted wings. "Get out," Anna said. Her voice was steady, despite the gun shaking in her hands. "Get out of our house." The man she'd shot stumbled toward the door, supporting his wounded shoulder with his good hand. The crawler followed. They made it to their horses and rode off into the darkness, leaving their dead and unconscious behind. Nate stood in the wreckage of his home, breathing hard, ribs screaming where the chair had broken against them. Eli came down the stairs, moving like an old man, one hand pressed to his side where he'd taken a hit. And Anna lowered the gun slowly, then sat down right there on the top step, like her legs had stopped working. "Is everyone all right?" Nate managed. "Define all right," Eli said, but he was grinning despite the pain. "We won. That's something." Nate climbed the stairs, each step an exercise in not showing how much it hurt. When he reached Anna, she looked up at him with eyes that had gone very dark. "I shot him," she said. "You did. I could have killed him, but you didn't. You stopped the threat, that's all." Nate held out his hand. "Come on, let's get downstairs. We need to check those men, make sure they're not dying on our floor." The 2 unconscious gunmen weren't dying, but they weren't waking up anytime soon either. Nate and Eli dragged them outside and tied them to the porch railing. When Marshal Hayes came looking, and he would come looking, there would be evidence of what had happened here. The dead man in the snow was another matter. Nate covered him with a tarp and tried not to think about the fact that he'd probably killed him. Self-defense or not, there was a body on his property now. Another weapon Wallace could use against him. Doc Morrison arrived at dawn, summoned by a neighbor who'd heard the gunshots and had the sense to fetch help before riding into whatever trouble was happening. She took one look at the three of them covered in blood and bruises, sitting on the porch in the freezing cold, and started barking orders like a field surgeon. Eli had cracked ribs. Anna had rope burns on her wrists where one of the men had tried to grab her before she'd shot him. And Nate had a gash across his back where he'd hit something sharp in the fight deep enough that Doc had to stitch it closed while he sat shirtless in the kitchen and tried not to let on how much it hurt. "You're going to have a hell of a scar," Doc said as she worked the needle through his skin. "Won't be my first." "No, I suppose not." She tied off the thread and sat back. "You know what this means, don't you?" Wallace sent those men. "This was attempted murder, or kidnapping, or both. Can you prove it? Can you?" Nate thought about the two men tied to his porch, both of them professionals, both of them the kind who wouldn't talk no matter what the law promised them. "No." "Then it's your word against his, and we both know whose word Judge Williams will take." The hearing was supposed to start at 10 in the morning. By 8, Nate, Anna, and Eli were on the road to Cheyenne, moving as fast as their battered bodies would allow. They'd left the two prisoners tied to the porch with a note for whoever found them first. The dead man was wrapped in the tarp and loaded into the wagon bed, evidence of what Wallace was willing to do. Anna rode beside Nate in silence, her hand occasionally drifting to where the gun was tucked in her coat pocket. She'd insisted on bringing it. Nate hadn't argued. "He's not going to stop," she said as Cheyenne came into view on the horizon. "Even if we win today, even if the judge rules in our favor, Wallace won't let this go." "I know. So what do?" Nate had been thinking about that all morning, about the barn burning and the men in the night and the certainty that more would come. About the fact that running wouldn't help because Wallace had the resources to chase them anywhere in the territory. About the fact that the law was supposed to protect people like Anna, but the law only worked when the people enforcing it couldn't be bought. "We make him stop," Nate said. "How?" I don't know yet, but we will." The courthouse in Cheyenne was a solid brick building that looked like it had been built to last 1,000 years. Inside, the halls echoed with the footsteps of lawyers and clerks and people seeking justice in a system that didn't always provide it. The courtroom itself was smaller than Nate had expected. 2 rows of benches for spectators, a raised platform for the judge, tables for the parties involved, and everywhere the smell of old wood and older power. Wallace was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked up when Nate and Anna entered, and his face showed no emotion at all, not surprise at seeing them alive, not anger at seeing them together. Nothing. Just the blank calculation of a man playing chess with pieces he considered expendable. Marshal Hayes was there too, standing near the back with his hat in his hands. He looked uncomfortable, like he knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite put his finger on what. The judge entered at precisely 10 o'clock. Henry Bradford was an old man, older than Nate had expected, with white hair and a face carved from granite. He took his seat, surveyed the courtroom, and banged his gavel once. "This court is now in session. Case of Wallace versus Cooper. Who's representing the plaintiff?" One of Wallace's lawyers stood. He was young, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and a smile that belonged on a snake oil salesman. "Edmund Whitmore for Mr. Wallace, Your Honor." "And the defense?" Nate stood. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor, and my wife." Bradford's eyebrows rose. "Your wife?" "Yes, sir. Anna and I were married 6 days ago." Wallace's lawyer was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This marriage is clearly a fraud entered into solely to circumvent Mr. Wallace's legitimate claim to repayment." "Is that what we're calling it now?" Nate said before he could stop himself. "A legitimate claim to own a human being." Bradford banged his gavel. "Mr. Cooper, you will address the court not opposing counsel. And Mr. Whitmore, you will save your arguments for when I ask for them. Now let's establish some facts. Mr. Wallace, you claim Mr. Cooper owes you $2,500. Is that correct?" Wallace stood smoothly. "Not exactly, Your Honor. I claim that Mr. Cooper forced me to accept payment under duress threatened me with violence, and then kidnapped Miss Brennan against her will. I'm seeking the return of the woman to fulfill her contracted labor or the return of my money plus damages for the loss of property and the assault on my person." "The woman has a name," Anna said quietly from beside Nate. Every head in the courtroom turned toward her. She stood slowly, and Nate saw her hand shake before she steadied it, saw the fear in her eyes, and the courage it took to speak anyway. Bradford leaned forward. "You're Anna Brennan, or Cooper, I suppose." "Anna Cooper, Your Honor. And I want to say something. Young lady, this isn't the time for, with respect, Your Honor, this is exactly the time." Her voice was getting stronger now, the tremor fading. "I've been silent for 7 years. I've been property for 7 years. I've been treated like something that could be bought and sold and used and thrown away for 7 years." And she told them about Nathan Cooper, who had spent every penny he had to buy her freedom, who had asked nothing in return, who had given her the first choice she'd had in 7 years. By the time she finished, there were tears on her face. But there were tears on other faces, too. The clerk was crying. The bailiff had his hand over his mouth. Even Marshal Hayes looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Wallace sat perfectly still, his face showing nothing. Bradford cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Mr. Wallace, do you dispute any of this testimony?" "Every word of it is a lie," Wallace said calmly. "Miss Brennan, or Mrs. Cooper, if she insists, was a willing employee who signed a legal contract. I treated her well, paid her fairly, and when she broke our agreement, I had every right to retrieve my property and demand repayment for the debt she incurred." "She's not property," Nate said. The words came out harder than he'd meant them to. "The 13th Amendment ended slavery. You can't own people. Not anymore." "I'm not claiming to own her," Wallace said with exaggerated patience. "I'm claiming she owes me money. $700 in original debt plus interest and the cost of retrieval. Legal debts entered into legally, which Mr. Cooper paid under coercion." Bradford looked at Nate. "Is that true? Did you threaten Mr. Wallace?" "I fired a warning shot to stop him from beating Anna with a riding crop in the middle of Fort Bridger. If that's coercion, then yes, I'm guilty." "And the marriage? When did that take place?" "January 12th, 6 days ago. And the baby Mrs. Cooper is carrying, 3 months along, Your Honor. Conceived before I ever met her." Bradford sat back in his chair, thinking. The courtroom was so quiet that Nate could hear the clock on the wall ticking, counting down the seconds until judgment fell. Finally, Bradford spoke. "I've been a judge for 30 years. I've seen a lot of cases in that time. A lot of people trying to use the law to get what they want instead of what's right. And I've seen what happens when we let the rich and powerful twist justice into something ugly." He looked at Wallace. "Mr. Wallace, I don't care how much money you have or how many lawyers you can afford. Under the law of this territory and the Constitution of the United States, human beings are not property. Mrs. Cooper is not your possession. She never was." Wallace's face finally showed emotion, rage carefully controlled but unmistakable. "Furthermore," Bradford continued, "I'm issuing an order of protection. You are not to contact Mrs. Cooper. You are not to come within 100 yards of her. You are not to send representatives to harass or threaten her. If you violate this order, I will have you arrested for contempt." He turned to Nate. "Mr. Cooper, I'm dismissing all claims against you. The marriage stands. The debt is nullified. And I'm referring this case to the territorial marshal for investigation into Mr. Wallace's conduct." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. "This court is adjourned." The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then Anna made a sound that was half sob and half laugh, and she turned and threw her arms around Nate's neck. He caught her, held her, felt her shake against him as 7 years of fear and pain finally broke open into something else. Relief, freedom, hope. Wallace stood slowly. He looked at Nate and Anna with eyes that promised this wasn't over. Then he turned and walked out of the courtroom, his lawyers scrambling to follow. But he was walking alone now, walking without his property, walking without his victory, just walking. And for the first time in 7 years, Anna Brennan Cooper was walking too, walking free. The victory lasted exactly 3 hours. They were halfway back to the ranch when Nate saw the riders, 5 of them silhouetted against the winter sun, blocking the road ahead. He recognized the horses before he recognized the men, Wallace's people, the same ones who'd tried to burn them out, or men just like them. Nate pulled the wagon to a stop. Beside him, Anna's hand went to the gun in her coat pocket. Behind them, Eli shifted in the wagon bed, moving closer to the rifle wrapped in canvas. "Stay calm," Nate said quietly. "Let me do the talking." The riders approached at a walk, taking their time, making it clear they weren't afraid. The one in front was older than the others, maybe 50, with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He reined in 10 feet from the wagon and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Cooper," he said, "heard you had a good day in court. News travels fast. It does when Mr. Wallace is paying for telegrams." The man shifted in his saddle. "He wants to make sure you understand something. That court order, that protection, it's just paper. Out here, paper doesn't mean much." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. Judge can say whatever he wants in Cheyenne, but we're not in Cheyenne anymore. And accidents happen on these roads, terrible accidents. Wagons tip over, people get hurt. Sometimes they don't make it home at all." Nate's hands tightened on the reins. He could feel Anna tensing beside him, could hear Eli's quiet breathing from the wagon bed. 5 against 3, and they had Anna to protect. The odds weren't good. But then he remembered something his sergeant had told him during the war. When you can't win with strength, win with nerve. "You know what I think," Nate said conversationally. "I think if Wallace wanted us dead, we'd be dead already. Those men last night, they could have killed us. They had guns, they had numbers, but they didn't. You know why?" The scarred man said nothing. "Because killing us would make this whole thing a murder case. Right now it's a civil dispute. Harassment maybe. Property damage. But if we turn up dead on this road, that's murder. And even Wallace can't buy his way out of that, not with Judge Bradford already watching him." "You seem awful confident for a man who's outnumbered." "I'm confident because I understand how this works. Wallace is trying to scare us into running, into leaving the territory, into making this his problem go away quietly. But we're not running. We're going home. And unless you're ready to commit murder in broad daylight on a public road, you're going to let us pass." The silence stretched out like wire pulled too tight. The scarred man stared at Nate. Nate stared back. Behind him, he heard Eli's hand move, probably reaching for the rifle. He prayed the boy would keep it hidden unless things went completely wrong. Finally, the scarred man laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full of real amusement. "You got stones, Cooper, I'll give you that." He turned to his men. "Let them through." The riders moved aside. Nate snapped the reins and the wagon started forward. They passed between the horsemen close enough that Nate could have reached out and touched them. No one spoke. No one moved. And then they were past the road opening up ahead of them, and the riders were receding behind them like a bad dream. Anna let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. "How did you know they wouldn't shoot?" "I didn't," Nate admitted. "But Wallace is smart. He knows that killing us would bring too much attention. Better to make us leave on our own. And if we won't leave, then he'll try something else. He always does." That something else came a week later in the form of papers delivered by a lawyer from Cheyenne. Not Wallace's lawyers, but someone new, someone who wore respectability like a suit and spoke in the kind of legal language designed to confuse rather than clarify. Nate read the papers 3 times before he understood what they were saying. Wallace was suing him again, not for the debt which the judge had nullified, but for damages, for the barn that burned which Wallace claimed Nate had burned himself, for insurance fraud, for assault claiming that Nate had shot at him without provocation in Fort Bridger, for alienation of affection, a legal term that meant Wallace was claiming Nate had stolen his fiancée. The total damages being sought were $10,000. $10,000 that Nate didn't have. $10,000 that would take him 20 years to earn. $10,000 that, if the court awarded them, would destroy everything he'd built. He showed the papers to Anna that night after Eli had gone to bed. She read them slowly, her face going pale as she understood what they meant. "This is my fault," she said. "This is Wallace refusing to lose. If I went somewhere he couldn't find me, maybe he'd drop this." Nate took the papers from her hands and tossed them on the table. "You're not leaving. We've been through this." "But $10,000, Nate. That's everything. That's the ranch. That's your life." "You're my life now. You and Eli and this place. All of it together, and I'm not letting Wallace take any of it." She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain and too much hope at the same time. "Why are you doing this? Really? Don't give me the speech about doing what's right. Tell me the truth." Nate thought about that, about the real answer, the one he'd been avoiding even in his own mind. "Because when Sarah died, I couldn't save her. I had money and time and every resource I could think of, and it didn't matter. She died anyway, and I spent 4 years feeling like a failure because I couldn't protect the person I loved most in the world." He met Anna's eyes. "But you I can save. Maybe not from everything. Maybe not perfectly. But I can stand between you and Wallace. I can fight for you. I can give you the chance to be free. And maybe that doesn't fix what happened with Sarah. Maybe it doesn't bring her back, but it means her death wasn't for nothing. It means I learned something from losing her." "What did you learn?" "That love is about showing up, about fighting, about refusing to give up even when the odds are impossible. Sarah taught me that. And now I'm using it to protect you." Anna was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. Nate had not expected this, had not let himself hope for it. Their marriage was supposed to be practical, a shield against Wallace, a partnership built on respect rather than romance. But here in the firelight, with her gray eyes searching his face, he realized that something had shifted. That respect and partnership had grown into something deeper without either of them quite noticing when it happened. "You don't have to say that," he managed. "I know I don't have to. I want to, because it's true. I don't know when it started. Maybe when you gave me the room with the lock on the inside. Maybe when you taught me to shoot. Maybe when you stood up in court and said I wasn't property. But somewhere along the way, you became more than the man who saved me. You became the man I want to build a life with. Anna, I'm not asking you to love me back. I know that Sarah was your whole world. I know I can't compete with that and I wouldn't try, but I wanted you to know. Before whatever comes next, I wanted you to know that you're not just fighting for an obligation. You're fighting for someone who loves you." Nate stood up, crossed the small space between them, and took her hands in his. They were warm and calloused and real. "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about it for days, trying to figure out how to say it. So I'm just going to say it straight." He took a breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." Her eyes widened. "It's not the same as what I had with Sarah," he continued. "It couldn't be. She was my first love, my young love, the kind that's easy and natural and feels like breathing. What I feel for you is different. It's harder, more deliberate. But it's real. You're brave and strong, and you don't give up, and somewhere along the way, I stopped just wanting to protect you and started wanting to be with you. For real. Not just on paper." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "So what do we do now?" "Now we stop letting Wallace dictate our lives. We stop reacting to his moves and start making our own. We stop being afraid of what he might do and start figuring out how to build something he can't destroy." How do we do that? Nate thought about the lawsuit, about the $10,000 he didn't have, about the certainty that Wallace would keep coming until one of them broke. And he thought about something Judge Bradford had said. "I'm referring this case to the territorial marshal for investigation." "We fight back," Nate said. "We gather evidence. We find witnesses. We prove that Wallace isn't just harassing us, he's breaking the law. And we make sure everyone knows it. Over the next 2 months, that's exactly what they did. Nate rode to Fort Bridger and talked to people who'd worked for Wallace over the years. Found 3 former employees who'd seen how Wallace treated Anna, who were willing to testify if someone would protect them from retaliation. Found the doctor who'd treated Anna the one time Wallace had hit her hard enough to break her arm, who'd suspected abuse but had been too afraid to report it. Anna wrote letters to her old life in Pennsylvania, to people who'd known her parents, who could testify that there had been no gambling debts, that her father had been a careful man who paid his bills and left his affairs in order. Eli tracked down the men who'd attacked the ranch following rumors and spending money they couldn't afford until he found one of them drunk in a saloon in Laramie. The man talked maybe because he was drunk, maybe because he was angry that Wallace had refused to pay him after the failed attack. He talked about being hired to burn the barn to scare the Coopers to make them run, and Eli got it all written down, signed by a notary, sealed and official. They built their case piece by piece, like assembling a wall from scattered stones, and while they built, Anna's pregnancy progressed. By March, she was showing clearly, the baby making itself known in the curve of her belly and the way she moved with new care. Dr. Morrison visited weekly, checking on both Anna and the child, pronouncing them both healthy despite everything. "Baby's strong," doctor said one afternoon in early April. "Due in late August, I'd say. You got a name picked out yet?" Nate and Anna looked at each other. They'd talked about names in the quiet moments, but never settled on anything. The baby was Wallace's by blood, but it would be theirs by choice. That seemed to matter more than genetics. "If it's a girl," Anna said slowly, "I'd like to name her Sarah, after your wife, after the person who taught you how to love." Nate felt something crack open in his chest. He'd been carrying Sarah's memory for so long, holding it close like a secret, afraid that letting anyone else touch it would somehow diminish what they'd had. But Anna wasn't trying to replace Sarah. She was trying to honor her, and that made all the difference. "Sarah Hope," he said. "Sarah for the past, hope for the future. And if it's a boy, I don't know. What do you think?" Anna's hand went to her belly, feeling the flutter of movement inside. "Daniel, after my brother, the one who believed I could be more than what other people told me I had to be." They were sitting on the porch when Doc Morrison left, watching the sun set over the mountains. The burned barn had been rebuilt, smaller than before, but sturdy. The sheep had multiplied spring, bringing new lambs into the world. And the ranch, which had felt like a tomb when Anna first arrived, now felt like a home. "I've been thinking," Anna said, "about after the baby comes, about what we want this place to be." "What do you mean?" "I mean we could just be a ranch, raise sheep, sell wool, live quietly, or we could be something more. We could be the place where people come when they need help, when they're running from something or they don't have anywhere else to go, like you helped me, like you helped Eli." Nate thought about that, about what it would mean to open their doors to others, to take in the broken and the lost. It would be hard, expensive, risky. Everything that made sense said it was a bad idea. But Sarah had always said that the best things in life were the ones that didn't make sense on paper. "I think," he said slowly, "that's exactly what we should do." The trial date for Wallace's lawsuit was set for June 15th. By then, Anna would be 8 months pregnant, heavy, with child barely able to move. But she insisted on being there, insisted on standing up one more time and telling her truth. The night before they were supposed to leave for Cheyenne, Anna's water broke. It was 6 weeks too early. The baby wasn't supposed to come until late July. But there was blood, and there was pain. And there was Doc Morrison arriving at midnight with a face that said she'd seen this before, and it rarely ended well. "Early labor," Doc said grimly. "Could be stress, could be the pregnancy complications, could be God knows what. But that baby is coming, and it's coming now, and we need to prepare for the worst." Nate stood outside the bedroom door while Anna labored, pacing like a caged animal, listening to her scream and being unable to do anything about it. Eli sat on the stairs, pale and silent, praying in Shoshone under his breath. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of screaming and blood, and Doc Morrison's voice, steady and calm, talking Anna through each contraction. 14 hours of Nate standing helpless, thinking about Sarah, about the way she'd died in childbirth, about the fact that he was going to lose another woman he loved, to the simple act of bringing life into the world. And then, at 2 in the afternoon on June 14th, a baby's cry split the air. Not strong, not healthy, but alive. Doc Morrison came out of the room with her arms full of something tiny and red and squalling. "It's a girl," she said. "Small, but she's breathing. And Anna is asking for you." Nate pushed into the room. Anna lay in the bed, pale as death, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But she was smiling. Actually smiling despite the pain, despite everything. "We have a daughter," she said. "Are you all right?" "I will be. Doc says I'll be fine, just tired and sore, but fine." She held out her arms. "Do you want to hold her?" Nate had held babies before, held Sarah's baby in the 5 minutes it had lived before dying. But this was different. This baby was breathing, fighting, refusing to give up despite being born too early into a world that didn't want her. He took the tiny bundle from Anna's arms and looked down at the smallest human being he'd ever seen. She had Anna's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair and hands no bigger than his thumb. She looked like she'd break if he breathed too hard. "Hello, Sarah," he whispered. The baby blinked up at him and made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. And in that moment, holding this child who wasn't his by blood but was his by every choice that mattered, Nate understood something he'd been missing for 4 years. Love wasn't about deserving. It wasn't about earning or owing or making up for past failures. Love was about showing up, about choosing to fight even when the odds were impossible, about refusing to let go even when letting go would be easier. Sarah had taught him that. Anna had reminded him. And now, this baby, this tiny fighter who'd come into the world 3 months too early and was breathing anyway, was proving it all over again. They missed the trial. Couldn't leave, not with Anna recovering and the baby so fragile. Nate sent word to Judge Bradford explaining what had happened, along with all the evidence they'd gathered, all the witness statements, all the testimony about Wallace's crimes. All the proof that this had never been about debt or contracts, but about one man's refusal to accept that people weren't property. The judgment came back 3 days later. Wallace's lawsuit was dismissed. Moreover, the territorial marshal had moved quickly. Within 48 hours of Judge Bradford's order, deputies raided Wallace's estate. What they found confirmed everything Anna had testified to: the iron collar, still stained with blood, hanging in Wallace's private study like a trophy. Ledgers documenting the acquisition of 17 other young women over the years, all under similar fraudulent debt contracts. Testimony from 12 former employees willing to speak now that Wallace's power was broken. The evidence was overwhelming. Wallace himself was being charged with conspiracy to commit arson, attempted kidnapping, assault, fraud, and 17 counts of unlawful imprisonment. The territorial marshal was issuing a warrant for his arrest. Wallace's lawsuit was dismissed. Moreover, Wallace himself was being charged with conspiracy to commit arson, attempted kidnapping, assault, and fraud. The territorial marshal was issuing a warrant for his arrest. And in a final note from Judge Bradford, "Congratulations on your daughter. May she grow up in a world more just than the one her mother survived." 2 weeks after the birth, Marshal Hayes came to the ranch, not to arrest anyone or deliver bad news, but just to talk. He sat on the porch with Nate while Anna fed the baby inside, and he looked out at the mountains for a long time before speaking. "Wallace is gone," he said. "Fled to California before the warrant could be served. Left everything behind. His estate, his money, everything. Just ran. Will he come back? Not if he's smart. Judge Bradford made it clear that if Wallace sets foot in Wyoming territory again, he'll be arrested on sight. And after everything that came out in the investigation, there's enough evidence to put him away for 20 years, maybe more. Nate absorbed that. Wallace gone. The threat ended. The battle won. It didn't feel real yet. After months of fighting, months of fear, the idea that it could just be over seemed too simple. "Thank you," he said, "for believing us." Hayes shook his head. "I should have believed you sooner. I knew something was wrong with Wallace for years. Everyone knew. But he had money, and money makes people blind. I'm sorry it took so long for the law to catch up." After Hayes left, Nate went inside to find Anna sitting in the rocking chair, the baby asleep in her arms. Eli was sprawled on the floor nearby, reading one of Sarah's old books. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the summer evening was turning the sky gold and purple. It was the most ordinary scene imaginable, and it was everything. 25 years is a long time to build a life. Long enough for a premature baby to grow into a strong young woman with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet determination. Long enough for a 16-year-old boy to become a man with a ranch of his own and 3 children who called Nate grandfather. Long enough for a burned barn to be rebuilt twice, for sheep to multiply into the hundreds, for a marriage born of necessity to transform into something deeper than most people found in a lifetime. Long enough for 2 people who'd been broken by different kinds of violence to learn how to be whole together. It was August 20th, 1905. Sarah Hope Cooper's 25th birthday, and the ranch was full of people. 3 generations gathered under the Wyoming sun, eating food prepared by too many hands to count, telling stories that had been told 100 times before and would be told 100 times again. Nate stood on the porch of the house he'd built and rebuilt, watching it all unfold. He was 63 now, his hair gone white, his hands gnarled from decades of hard work. But his eyes were still sharp, and when Anna came up beside him and slipped her hand into his, he squeezed back with the same certainty he'd felt the first time he'd touched her 25 years ago. "Thinking about the old days?" Anna asked. She was 47 now, her auburn hair threaded with silver, her face lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from smiling more than frowning. The scars on her back had faded but never disappeared. Neither had the strength that had kept her alive through 7 years of hell. "Just remembering how we got here," Nate said. "Long road. Worth every mile." Down in the yard, Sarah was surrounded by her siblings. Daniel, named for Anna's brother, was 23 now, working as a deputy marshal in Cheyenne. Grace, their youngest at 19, was teaching school in Fort Bridger. And then there was Eli's family, his wife Margaret, and their 3 children, all of them running around like wild things, while Margaret tried to maintain some semblance of order. "Papa," Sarah called up to the porch. She'd been calling him that since she was old enough to talk, even though they'd explained to her early on that Nate wasn't her father by blood. She'd listened to the explanation, thought about it for approximately 10 seconds, and then said, "But you're my papa anyway." That had been the end of that discussion. Nate walked down the steps. Sarah met him halfway and threw her arms around him in the kind of hug that said she hadn't quite outgrown being his little girl, even if she was now taller than Anna and engaged to a good man who worked the Harper Ranch. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Nate said. "Thank you for the party. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Your mother insisted." "Mother insists on a lot of things." Sarah pulled back, grinning. "That's why we love her." They walked together toward the gathering, and Nate found himself remembering the day Sarah was born. The terror of it. The certainty that he was going to lose Anna the same way he'd lost his first wife. The miracle of that tiny baby breathing against all odds. Doc Morrison was here today, too ancient now at 73, but still sharp as a tack. She'd delivered all 3 of Nate and Anna's children, plus most of the children in the valley. She saw Nate looking and raised her glass in a mock toast. "Stop being maudlin," she called over. "This is a party, not a funeral." I'm not being maudlin, I'm being reflective. Same thing when you're our age. Reverend Shaw stood and called for attention. He was 83 now, bent with age, but still commanding when he needed to be. Before we eat, I'd like to say a few words. The crowd quieted. Even the children stopped running long enough to listen. 25 years ago, Shaw began, I married 2 people in my church. It was January, cold as the devil's heart, and they came to me with a story that would have tested the faith of Job himself. A woman who'd been enslaved in all but name. A man who'd given everything he had to free her. A marriage born not of romance, but of necessity. He paused, looking at Nate and Anna. I remember thinking that day that I'd never seen 2 people less likely to make a marriage work. They barely knew each other. They were marrying for legal protection, not love. Every piece of conventional wisdom said they were making a mistake. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. But I've learned something in my 83 years on this earth. Conventional wisdom is usually conventional for a reason, but wisdom means knowing when to break the rules. These 2 broke every rule. They built a marriage on respect instead of passion, on partnership instead of possession, on choice instead of obligation, and look what they built. He gestured around at the gathered family, the thriving ranch, the life that had grown from seeds planted in desperate circumstances. This is what love looks like when it's built on the right foundation, not the easy kind of love that comes from moonlight and poetry. The hard kind. The kind that shows up every day and does the work. The kind that says, I choose you every morning and means it every night. Sarah was crying now. So was Anna. Hell, Nate felt his own eyes getting wet, though he'd be damned if he'd admit it. So let's raise a glass, Shaw said. Not just to Sarah on her birthday, but to Nathan and Anna Cooper. 2 people who proved that the best families aren't always built by blood. Sometimes they're built by choice, by courage, by refusing to give up even when the whole world says you should. Everyone raised their glasses, even the children with their cups of milk and cider. To the Coopers, Shaw said. To the Coopers, the crowd echoed. The party went on for hours. Food was eaten, stories were told, and as the sun began to set, someone brought out a fiddle and started playing. Couples danced in the grass, children ran in circles, and the whole scene looked like something out of a painting. Nate found Anna standing alone near the rebuilt barn, watching it all with a soft smile on her face. He came up beside her and, without speaking, offered his hand. She took it, and they danced. Not well, Nate had never been a good dancer, but with the kind of comfort that came from 25 years of knowing each other's rhythms. Around them the party continued, but in their small circle it was just the 2 of them. Do you remember the first time we danced? Anna asked. We've never danced before. Exactly. 25 years married, and this is our first dance. We did everything backward, didn't we? Nate smiled. Seemed to work out all right. Better than all right. Anna leaned her head against his shoulder. I was thinking earlier about that day in Fort Bridger, when you saw me in that collar. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just walked away every day? Really, really. And every day I'm grateful I didn't. They swayed in silence for a moment. Then Anna spoke again, her voice quiet enough that only Nate could hear. I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone. Nate felt a flutter of concern. What is it? That day when you found me in the snow with Wallace standing over me, I'd made a decision. I was going to let him kill me. I wasn't going to run anymore, wasn't going to fight. I was just going to close my eyes and let it end. Nate's steps faltered. Anna? But then you fired that shot and everything changed. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, not because you saved me, but because you showed me that there were still good men in the world. Men who would stand up for what's right, even when it cost them everything. She pulled back to look at him. You didn't just free me from Wallace. You freed me from giving up, from believing that the world was nothing but cruelty and pain. You showed me that there was still something worth living for. You would have found a way, Nate said. You're the strongest person I know. Maybe. But I didn't have to do it alone. That's the gift you gave me, not rescue. partnership, the knowledge that I didn't have to carry everything by myself anymore. Nate thought about that, about the weight of being strong, of being brave, of being the one everyone else leaned on. He'd carried that weight for years after Sarah died, and it had nearly crushed him. But sharing it with Anna, building a life where they could be strong together, had made all the difference. "I love you," he said. Simple words, but they held 25 years of meaning. "I love you too. I have since that first night when you gave me a room with a lock on the inside, when you gave me the choice to feel safe." The music changed, shifting to something slower, and around them, other couples joined the dance. Eli with his wife, Daniel with a girl from town, Sarah with her fiancé. Grace dancing with one of Eli's children balanced on her feet, making the little one giggle. Family. Not the kind bound by blood alone, but the kind built by choice and effort and showing up every single day. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, the party began to wind down. Children were carried to wagons, adults said their goodbyes, and slowly the crowd dispersed until only the immediate family remained. They sat together on the porch, the six of them, Nate and Anna Eli and his wife Sarah and her fiancé. The next generation and the current one bound together by history and hope. "Tell us the story," Sarah said suddenly. "The real story. Not the version you tell at parties. I want to know what really happened." Nate and Anna looked at each other. They'd told the story before, of course, but all was in broad strokes, all was leaving out the darkest parts. Protecting their children from the full truth of what Anna had endured, what they'd fought through together. But Sarah was 25 now, an adult, getting married in 2 months. She deserved to know the truth, so they told it, all of it. Anna spoke about Wallace, about the collar, about 7 years of being treated like property. Her voice never wavered, though Nate saw her hand shake when she talked about the worst parts. He held that hand, grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't in that place anymore. Nate told about the decision to spend every penny he had, about the fear that he was making a terrible mistake, about the moment he'd seen her in that collar and known he couldn't walk away. He told about the wedding, about Wallace's revenge, about the night the gunman came, and Anna had stood at the top of the stairs with a gun in her hands and refused to be a victim anymore. When they finished, there were tears on every face. Sarah was the first to speak. "I need to say something. Something I've thought about my whole life but never said out loud." Everyone looked at her. "I know who my biological father was. You told me when I was old enough to understand. And I want you both to know that it doesn't matter. It never mattered. Wallace gave me life, but you gave me everything that made that life worth living." She looked at Nate. "You're my father. The only father I've ever known or wanted. Blood doesn't make a family. This does." She gestured around at all of them. "Choice makes a family, and I choose you, every day, forever." Nate couldn't speak. The words he wanted to say were stuck somewhere in his throat, tangled up with 25 years of love and fear and fierce protective pride. So he just stood up, crossed to where Sarah sat, and pulled her into his arms the way he had when she was small and the world felt too big. "You're mine," he said roughly. "You've always been mine. From the moment I held you and you grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. Mine. Not because of blood, because of choice." "I know, Papa, I know." Later, after everyone else had gone to bed, Nate and Anna sat alone on the porch swing they'd added to the house 10 years ago. The night was clear and cold, the stars bright enough to cast shadows. "Do you ever think about her?" Anna asked quietly. "About Sarah, your first wife." "Sometimes," Nate admitted. "Not as much as I used to, not with the same grief." "Tell me about her, really tell me. Not the careful version you give when you're trying not to hurt my feelings." Nate took a breath. "She was light. That's the first thing I always remember, walking into a room and making it brighter just by being there. She laughed easily, loved easily, made everything feel possible." "How did you meet?" "Church social. I was 20, she was 19. My sister introduced us. 3 months later, we were married. Did you love her right away? No, that came later. But I knew right away that I wanted to know her, wanted to see what we could build together. Anna was quiet for a moment. I'm not her. No, you're not. You're you. And I wouldn't want you to be anyone else. Even though I'm harder, less easy to love, Nate turned to face her, making her meet his eyes. You're not harder to love. You're different to love. Sarah was summer. You're winter. Both beautiful, both necessary, both irreplaceable. He reached up and touched her face, tracing the lines that time and hardship had carved there. I loved Sarah with the kind of love that comes easy when you're young and the world hasn't broken you yet. I love you with the kind of love that knows exactly how hard life can be and chooses you anyway. That's not less. It's more. Anna closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I spent 7 years believing I wasn't worth loving, that I was damaged, broken, used up. You were never those things. I know that now, but back then when you first brought me here, I couldn't imagine anyone seeing past what Wallace had done to me. Couldn't imagine being anything but his victim forever. What changed? You did. You never treated me like I was broken. You treated me like I was hurt, like there was a difference, like I could heal. Nate thought about that distinction, broken versus hurt. One implied something that couldn't be fixed. The other implied something that could given time and care and the right kind of love. You healed yourself, he said. I just gave you the space to do it. No, we healed each other. You were broken too, Nate, after Sarah died. You were just better at hiding it. She was right. He'd been broken, hollowed out by grief, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And Anna, with her fierce determination and her refusal to give up, had given him a reason to care again, to fight again, to love again. So where does that leave us? He asked. Anna smiled the kind of smile that still took his breath away after 25 years. Right here, on this porch, in this life we built together, with 3 children who chose us as much as we chose them, with grandchildren on the way, with a future that doesn't look anything like what either of us planned, but looks exactly like what we needed. She stood up, pulling him with her. Come to bed, husband. Tomorrow is another day, and we have sheep to tend and a wedding to plan, and 100 other ordinary miracles to attend to. They went inside together, and Nate took one last look at the ranch before closing the door. The barn he'd rebuilt, the sheep pen that had expanded 5 times, the house that had started as a lonely bachelor's cabin and had grown into a home full of voices and laughter and love. And he thought about the choice he'd made 25 years ago, to spend every penny he had on a woman he didn't know, to stand between her and the man who claimed to own her, to build a marriage on partnership instead of passion. It had been the best choice of his life, better than safe, better than careful, better than all the reasons that told him not to get involved. Because in the end, love wasn't about deserving or earning or making up for past failures. Love was about showing up, about choosing someone every day, about fighting for them even when the odds were impossible, about building something together that neither of you could have built alone. Sarah had taught him that. Anna had reminded him. And their children, biological and chosen, were proving it all over again. The legacy wasn't the ranch, though, that would endure. Wasn't the money, though they had enough now to be comfortable. Wasn't even the name, though Cooper had become a respected name in the territory. The legacy was the choice itself, the decision to love when it would have been easier to walk away, to fight when it would have been safer to surrender, to build when it would have been simpler to remain alone. That legacy would outlive them both. And standing in his home, listening to Anna move through their bedroom, hearing the settling sounds of a house full of people he loved, Nate knew, with absolute certainty, that every moment of struggle had been worth it. Every penny spent, every battle fought, every moment of fear and pain and impossible odds, worth it, all of it, for this, for family built not by blood but by choice, for love that showed up every day and meant it every night, for a life that proved against all evidence to the contrary that broken people could heal each other. That was the shepherd's vow, not to save, not to fix, not to rescue, but to stand beside someone and say, "You're not alone. We'll face this together, for as long as it takes, for as long as we have, forever if we're lucky." And they had been lucky, despite everything, because of everything, lucky beyond measure. And the story, which had started with a woman in chains and a man who couldn't walk away, ended here, with a house full of love, a family built on choice, and two people who'd found each other in the darkness and built a light bright enough to last 25 years, bright enough to last forever. The end.